Well, welcome to the MAM journals. This is the fourth of 6 lockdown videos that I'm doing on bikes in my garage, and this particular bike, the Z1000, is one of my favourites. I'll try and split it into some logical sequences for us. So I'll be talking about the history of the bike, and I'll divide that into two. I'll be talking about the cultural history and the evolution of the superbikes, and then I'll be talking about the racing heritage of bikes like this, which I find particularly interesting. We'll then do what I call a technical walk around, and again I'll split that into two. I'll be doing the differences between this bike, the Z1000, and its older, smaller brother, the Z1, and then I'll actually be talking about this specific bike as it is what I fondly describe as a bitzer, and I'll be just going through the differences of the market and what bits are fitted on here which are original and which bits are from other markets. And finally, I'm going to be talking about my own ownership experience and what I like about this bike, and I hope you enjoy the video. To understand the cultural history of this bike, we really need to talk about the arrival of the superbike. And to do that, we need to go back to 1968 and the Tokyo show, when Honda launched the first superbike, as they were termed, and it was for the 754, and it was released to the general market in 1969. Kawasaki had been working on their version of a 750 and took one look at the bike at the show and realised they needed to think again, and they began work on the famous landmark bike, the Z1. The Z1 was launched in 1972 at Cologne, and for general release in 1973. It was a phenomenal bike for its time, and it was actually one of the bikes that inspired my lifelong passion for motorcycles. It was actually the bike that won Motorcycle News, I think they called it Machine of the Year, between 1973 and 76. I don't think any other bike has managed that level of public accolade. So at the end of the development of the 900, they needed to go again, and they developed this bike in 1976, and it was released in 1977. With the arrival of the superbikes, it wasn't long before someone thought we need to create a superbike race series, and indeed in 1976 AMA in America launched their series. The first year was won by actually an Englishman by the name of Reg Pridmore, who as a young man had sold everything he had and emigrated to America, and he won it on a BMW, which I think scrutineering was of a slightly lighter touch in those days. But the next year, to defend his championship, he moved to the 4 cylinders, and he moved to Kawasaki's, ably assisted by a young Japanese guy by the name of Potts Yoshimura. There are a number of good riders riding the Kawasaki in those years, and most of you recognise the name Eddie Lawson, who went on to later success racing Kawasaki's, and a guy called Wes Cooley. And actually, Potts Yoshimura and Wes got on pretty well, and they went on after racing for 2 years on Kawasaki's, which had tried pretty determinedly to throw Wes off on quite a few occasions. Decided they wanted a slightly easier life and thought they might have more success on the Suzuki GS1000, which had been launched. So Potts Yoshimura and Wes went off to race as the Yoshimura Cooley team, and they won the championship in 1979 and 80. And of course Eddie Lawson came back on a further development of this bike, or 1000cc Kawasaki, and he won the championship in 81 and 82. So clearly there was a tug of power war going on there between them. The general view of the Kawasaki was it was a fantastic engine, but almost universally regarded by the riders as having pretty evil handling, which we'll touch upon a bit later when we talk about the road manners of the bike. But anyway, let's go around and do a technical review, and we'll see if we can get some more details. Right, so let's look at the big differences between the 900 and the Z1000. Clearly the most obvious thing to talk about first is this engine, which they kindly stamp to show you that it's 1015 cc. The engine was infinitely tunable, and if engines can be such a thing, they're famed for their reliability and being bulletproof. I've never tested that to its extreme, and I'm sure some have, but it's certainly a very robust unit. The fact that they tune them to the level of power that they managed to get out of them over the years is really indicative of how strong an engine it was. It's got a great history in drag racing, actually, where they put all sorts of devices on it to get additional power from. And as I said, in the racing series, they didn't have any problem getting plenty of power out of the units. So that was the big change. The other change they put on to try and sort of ease some of the handling characteristics, they did put bracing on the frame to try and assist. And the other obvious change was at the rear there, they fitted a disc to replace the previous drum. Most of us who learnt to ride in the 70s considered this device here to be a place to race your foot, as opposed to anything that's likely to have any impact on the speed at which you're going. The brakes are sort of jest really, but they weren't up to much, and I know I have seen people hustling these along quite briskly over the years, and when I actually get to a standstill and have a look at them, virtually to a man, they've changed the brakes, they've changed the discs, the calipers and the hoses to see if they can actually get the thing to stop. If you're riding a standard bike and need to stop in in a hurry, I would advocate prayer and a parachute as opposed to conventional braking devices. So they were the main changes that were introduced. If we go to the instrument cluster, they're actually the same as the 900. The A2, if anyone's interested in distinguishing between the two, actually revs to 8,500 on the red line. Well, this, as I say, has the original clocks on it. In terms of standard power production, the handbook says that this produces 83 horsepower, though interestingly 85 in the German market. I'm not quite sure what the difference were there. And that compares to 82 for the 900. But clearly this has had plenty of development scope, and very quickly the horsepower went up as they enhanced it with later developments. I said that I would talk about this specific bike because it is, as I fondly describe it, a bitzer. And what do I mean by that? Well, if I just back off a bit, that reflector attached to the front of the frame there tells us that it's a American market bike originally, as they were not fitted to the European bikes. But there is then straight away, the more observant of you and more expert, you'll see that this has got twin discs. Now, twin discs were available in America, but they weren't very often chosen as an option because of the expense, and they had singles while the European had doubles. So I actually asked Classic Bikes in Drayton, Market Drayton, where I bought the bike, to see if we could put some sort of brakes on it, see if we could stop it. And the exhaust on the bike is a 4x2, which is what they came from the factory, as opposed to the 4x4 which the 900 had, which is obviously a distinguishing feature. These are obviously copies, in fairness. These are not the original pipes, although I'd like to think they're pretty much in keeping with the original bike. Other things that tell me that this is a bitzer are, well, clearly it's got the European Z1000. In America they were KZs, and if you look at the seat there, a strap over the middle shows that it's a European based seat, and the rear mudguard is the shorter American spec. They do actually come down a bit further on the European models. So this is something that's been imported from America, first came over a few years ago, and has been, I think, tastefully restored, probably too strong a word, but maintained in keeping with its original spirit. This colour is a modern interpretation of diamond wine metallic. I might have to check that, but I think that's right. It's getting a bit of a glare there, so I'll try and get around another angle, give you the better picture of it. They also did them in diamond blue sky, I think was the phrase. Maybe the two colour options, and I like it. The more I say, the experts amongst you may say, well, the stripes aren't quite in the right place. None of which, in fairness, worries me very much, as I just think I just want something broadly in keeping with what the original bike was like, and is fun to own. I would like to take this opportunity actually to thank the Facebook members of the Z1 owners group. In compiling this, I did try and I put a picture up and asked if anybody could help me, and I have to say I was overwhelmed with the response of people kindly pointing out what is what to make sure that I could get my facts right. They're a very knowledgeable and very helpful group, so if anybody wants to find any more information, I commend them to you. So that's really the technical view. People did enhance the performance of them to try and sort out some of the things themselves. There are lots of tuning parts around over the years on these. And what they tended to do was, as I say, upgrade the brakes immediately, put steering dampers on to see if they could stop it shaking its head quite so vigorously. Can get a bit lively up at the top end. And they often change that rear swinging arm. I've seen a lot with box section in. And as I say, on some of the bikes I've seen being hustled along, does seem to make a difference. But I'm quite happy to keep this as a fairly standard bike. So what's it like to own and ride in the modern world? I have very fond memories of Z1000s. This is not the first one that I've actually owned. I had one back in 81, 82. Which I thoroughly enjoyed. At that time in your life, and in those sort of social circumstances, the first thing you did within 24 hours of owning the bike was find out how fast it went. And although the book says it does 125, mine would only do just under 120 down a mine shaft on a good day, but I suspect that's because somebody had put a 4-into-1 exhaust with it and hadn't tuned the carb, so maybe it was capable of more, but certainly not the one I had. In terms of handling, well, it was a bit like a shopping trolley, to be honest, in that what was going on at the front wasn't always necessarily connected to what was going on at the back, but it was great fun and I survived, and it was a bike that I remember very fondly. So later on in life, I had the opportunity to go, and I went to Classic Bikes actually in Market Drayton and was looking around their fantastic showroom and I was considering maybe getting a Z1, but actually I saw this bike and I thought, actually that is what I'd like to do. It's a trip down memory lane, and it's the difference in the price between the Z1s and the Z1000s is still quite significant in terms of gap for a nice one, and I took the view that I'd worry less about the Z1000, and actually I like to ride and enjoy my bike, so I do about 500, maybe 700 miles a year on this bike. I think most of us have got one of these. It's not their only bike, and I would say if you're in a rush, take something else. It's a nice bike to sort of potter around on safely. Obviously at national speed limits it's perfectly fine, but if you push it on, it's still got the same characteristic flaws that it had when it was built, and there are much better handling and much higher performance bikes in the market. But I do thoroughly enjoy it. It's a great bike to go to a cafe with, do 100 miles, pop in for a cup of tea somewhere and have a chat with somebody about motorcycles, which is, for me, part of the fun of motorcycling. Anyway, I do hope that you've enjoyed the video, and if you'd be kind enough to, if you have, to press like and maybe subscribe, and equally to put any comments or additional insights that you've got on this bike or bikes like it in the section below. My next bike is going to be another Kawasaki actually, and you perhaps won't be surprised to hear that I've got a Kawasaki Z1000 RS, and I'll be talking about that bike in the next video. Thank you very much for watching.